Gray. I am an assistant professor of public history in the McAnulty College and Graduate School of Liberal Arts here at Duquesne. I've spent a lot of time in the past few years learning about AI through trainings and readings, thanks in large part due to our Center for Teaching Excellence. I have not integrated AI into my scholarship and teaching. I'm not convinced that it helps me serve my students and fulfill my duties as faculty. But I come to this topic with a mindset of growth and learning, and I know that when I incorporate AI into my teaching, I want to do so in ways that are responsible and ethical and feel authentic to my teaching practices as a humanities scholar. So I'm very happy to be part of this symposium and looking forward to our conversation today about AI in higher ed.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Beal. I use she, her pronouns, and I work as the educational specialist in the Center for Teaching and Learning at Otterbein University, which is a small private school located in central Ohio. I also my academic background and academic discipline is in classical archaeology, so I have a degree in Roman archaeology. We can talk about that at the snack break. And in my role as a faculty developer, I have, over the last few years, done countless workshops for faculty about generative AI to help support them on how to navigate it responsibly with their students and support their students through ethical use of AI. I also run a number of faculty programs where we work together in community to explore our own values related to generative AI and help them just think through how we can move forward productively. So excited for the conversation.
Hi, everyone. I'm also excited for the conversation. My name is Anoff Cobblah. I'm an assistant director at the Center for Research on Learning and Teaching at the University of Michigan, which is a large public university. I use he, him pronouns. In my role, I do a few things. I help instructors with equity-focused teaching. I help graduate students with their professional development, and I help both graduate students and instructors think through their responses to artificial intelligence. My background is in English literature. Obviously, that's a field which is still in the midst of being greatly impacted by artificial intelligence, and it really shapes my approach to this topic, and it shapes how I interact with faculty who come to me and obviously are greatly concerned about what these new AI tools are going to be doing in their classrooms. But that said, I also am optimistic about the fact that I think if we do approach generative AI intentionally and we have conversations like this, I think this is a real opportunity to reassert some of the values of higher education.
My name's Audrey. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a writer. I write about education technology, the history of education technology. I'm also a serial dropout, dropped out of high school, dropped out of college, dropped out of a PhD program. But I'm planning on sticking around to the end of this panel to respond to what folks have to say.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. So one of the things we talked about initially in our conversations was how much time goes into preparing faculty and graduate students to adequately integrate AI into their courses, into their teaching, and then on the side of both the faculty members, the graduate instructors, and us as professional developers, how much time that takes away from the work we could do on other student-centered practices. So I was wondering, we'll start with Anoff.
Yeah, and I think this is a great question. It's one that instructors come to me with all the time. How much time is it going to take for me to change my class to respond to AI? It's complicated in a few ways. It's very hard to quantify because these tools are changing all the time. There are things that at one point I described as fairly complex, like training a custom chatbot on your course materials to help students, that are now actually trivially easy. There's a lot of tools that can do things like that. There's also a lot of disciplinary difference in fields like English literature, where a lot of the assessment was through writing. Of course, you're going to require more redesign in a classroom versus something like chemistry, where a student might have been doing more demonstrating of their learning through laboratory experiments, where they might not have to redesign quite as much. So those two things complicate it. And then there's two things that I think actually make that effort that lessen the amount of work that's required to integrate AI into the classroom. One is collaboration. I'm frequently reminding instructors that there are various people on many university campuses who can help them with that integration process, be it a teaching center, IT services, or collaborators within their departments, and also students. I love to remind instructors that students are also a part of that collaboration process and can give them really essential feedback on the changes they might want to make to the course. So that's one thing that can lessen that workload. And then the other thing is the student-centered approaches that Jeff just mentioned, because I have found that those instructors who were already doing some of the things that we consider student-centered teaching approaches, things like forming a relationship with students, scaffolding assignments so that you understand how students are actually completing them, having multiple pathways for students to demonstrate their learning. Those are all things that actually are more important in an age of artificial intelligence. Those are the things that I really encourage instructors to lean on as they're thinking through how they can continue to make sure students are meeting the learning outcomes. So it certainly can be a lot of work to integrate AI into a classroom, but I do think that if instructors are already focused on those student-centered practices, it's not a distraction. It actually can really help to lessen that workload and make it far more manageable.
Thank you. And Sarah, if you...
Yeah, I want to begin by acknowledging that it is, I mean, to be completely honest, it's been completely unfair what's been happening to faculty in higher education over the last, 5-10 years. And we so frequently, people are tired. We experience a ton of change with the COVID-19 pandemic and the way that changed the ways in which we approach education. We are seeing students struggling with engagement, struggling with mental health. AI is feeling like just one more thing added on to already very busy times that people are facing right now. And so I absolutely acknowledge that it is unfair. We are asking faculty to change what they've been doing and what has worked for a long time to accommodate this new technology, and it's hard. It's really hard work. One of the things that I have found so exciting about this new AI age and is the fact that we're kind of all in the same boat. Like, none of us know what to do about it, and we're all trying to figure it out, right? And so what that does is it provides us with a lot of opportunity for our faculty to come together in community and talk. And so what I'm seeing at my institution and at the institution I was at prior as well, like, AI is bringing people into the room. And then from there, we can start to have these conversations about, okay, AI's here, we can't get rid of it, we can't change anything, so what can we do? How can we focus on things like authentic learning and actually assessing, revisiting what our goals are for education, revisiting our learning objectives, and thinking about, are we actually assessing those learning objectives, or are we just doing something because it's what we've always done? So for me, I see the emergence of this AI technology as opportunities to go back to some of the fundamentals, as Anoff mentioned, right? Transparency in our teaching. Are we explaining to students, this is why we're doing this assignment, right? And what an impact that can have. And that's an opportunity to explain to them explicitly why or why not they should be engaging with AI to complete that assignment. I'm a big proponent for alternative grading practices. So thinking about revisiting how we assess student learning. And what a great deterrent for AI if we are asking our students to really engage in authentic learning in the classroom space. In my own teaching, I love to work with AI to develop games for my students. That's actually alleviating some of the time that I would put into the lesson planning of my teaching. It takes a long time to develop a game by yourself. But if you work with a generative AI tool to develop the materials for a game, I can do that in 30 minutes and have a really exciting learning opportunity for my students to engage with in the classroom. So for me, I actually see it as an opportunity for us to revisit what it means to be an effective instructor, right, and engage in these conversations. And our conversations don't have to be focused on AI, right? We can have a community that's talking about universal design for learning, and then, oh, by the way, AI can support universal design for learning by taking one of your readings and turning it into a podcast and giving students an alternative way to engage with it. So that's where I'm at. I'm probably a very optimistic person in general, but I do see it as providing us with a lot of opportunities to just rethink what we're doing, and still focusing with the same end goal in mind, which is those student-centered learning practices.
Great, thank you. And then Stephanie.
Yes, thank you. I hope not to sound too much of a broken record, but from the faculty perspective, if I make the decision to incorporate AI into my teaching, I know it will require a lot of labor on my end on top of already onerous teaching, service, and scholarship responsibilities. This, in turn, of course, requires an incredible amount of labor on the end of the educational developers like Jeff, Anoff, and Sarah, whom a lot of faculty expect unfairly to be experts in AI. And how the university system is built and what it requires of faculty does not actually allow for a lot of time nor incentive to pursue training and learning opportunities. Faculty training is self-selective. It is a self-motivated professional development activity. So I think there are two issues at play here. The amount of labor to become sufficient in AI use to then properly educate your students about how to use AI, and the necessary ingredient of motivation to spend our precious professional development time deeply studying AI. So to address the second part of the question, I do worry, especially as a humanities scholar, that AI training is monopolizing our attention in the realm of pedagogical practices, and therefore reducing our commitment to other really important teaching approaches. And I know there is overlap, and it's lovely to hear, especially from these folks, that there's overlap, but other approaches like trauma-informed teaching, culturally responsive teaching, experiential learning, climate literacy, and other inclusive practices. From my end, these approaches at this point very directly put issues of equity and social justice and student well-being and civic development at the center of the learning environment. And at this point, I don't think AI truly does that as well. So I do worry about the consequences of disinvestment in these other training approaches when we hyper-focus in this moment on AI. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And I really appreciate the balance of, yes, thinking about how we can integrate AI into our teaching and our learning does get us to refocus on, well, what are the other elements that we want to draw out? So it does kind of like shake the Etch-a-Sketch in a way that kind of forces us to reset. But I also think, yeah, it's a huge personal, professional environment or investment that we are forcing ourselves often to make when it's not the one we would choose to make. So for the second question, I wanted to ask, we have discussed the fact that college curricula already produce skilled experts in their disciplines, and also research has shown that when you are a disciplinary expert, you are better at using AI tools to perform your discipline. So a journalist is always going to be better at using AI to do journalist assignments than an AI expert is going to be at using AI to do journalism. That accepted, what extra steps do we need to do to ensure that our students are getting an education that allows them to adequately engage with AI? What changes would we need to make? How should we make those? Is it necessary if we're already producing skilled graduates? And we'll start with Sarah.
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting question because very often when I'm working with a faculty member who's very opposed to generative AI and they don't understand the technology, and they always say, well, I put my essay prompt in and it came up with garbage. And that's always, we've all done that. We've all put essay prompts in and it's come up with garbage. And because they have the disciplinary expertise, they can see that it's garbage. But what's missing in that understanding and engagement with generative AI is they aren't taking the time to understand why it's garbage and what the AI is actually doing that produces garbage. And so it's fine when you're working with it in your own academic discipline because you can assess it and say, well, I know because I know my academic discipline, I know that's not a very good answer. The problem is when we go out into the real world, we aren't just engaging with AI being used in our academic disciplines. I think of, there's a trend in communities that might be under-resourced to think about, okay, how could we use AI to fill in? So for example, how could we use AI to do medical diagnoses, to fill in because they don't have access to enough healthcare providers? Well, if I'm a person who doesn't understand what generative AI is doing and I'm engaging with that technology, I might not necessarily have the skill set to critically think about the output that's being given to me, right? And think about that engagement. And so for me, I think it's so important that we are helping our students. We don't need to train every student on how to build a large language model. I think that's a waste of a lot of people's time. I'm never going to build a large language model. It's never going to be relevant to my life. But I do need to understand the limitations of the AI as we were talking about, right? And where it's important to have that human component. And so for me, it's more about, it's not training our students to be able to use AI in every possible way, but it's helping them understand what what are the limitations of the AI? So how could you use it to help make some things more efficient, but also where are the limitations of that, where you should stop? So I want to recommend a book that really helped with my thinking through this. It's called The Last Human Job by Allison Pugh, if anyone's interested. She's thinking about connective labor, which is all of the like interpersonal stuff that we do in our day-to-day lives that helps us to be effective at our jobs. And how do we ensure that connective labor can't be done by AI? I can't build a connection with you by using AI for that relationship. And so how do we help our students to see the value of that connective labor to make them effective citizens of the world, right, as they go out into the workforce? And an example I talked to these folks about and we really enjoyed, has anyone been to a Wendy's drive-thru where you order with AI? Has anyone seen that yet? A few of us. So Wendy's drive-thru is starting to incorporate AI to take orders. And so I drove up, I made my order, and I was like, that was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. So I get up to the counter where I pay, where there's a real human being, and it was a young man standing there, and I asked him, you know, I've never ordered from an AI before. How do you feel about it? How do you feel about the fact that AI is taking the orders? And he told me that he loved it because he used to have to listen to orders while talking face-to-face with another person. And so by letting the AI take the order, he can really focus on the face-to-face interaction he's having with another person. And like, if we could teach all of our students that, right, I think that would be amazing. I think that would really help us go forward into this AI world in a really productive way.
Thank you. Stephanie?
Okay, so this question of are we already preparing our students for AI use, or is there more that we could do? I feel conflicted answering this question because on one hand, I want to say, yes, of course we are preparing our students by teaching them to think critically, to ask thoughtful questions, to seek out and synthesize contextual information, to compare and contrast and utilize data. But at the same time, it is clear that students are not skillfully using AI programs to assist them, but rather to perform for them. And I don't say that with any blame on our students, because part of the issue is that no, neither faculty nor students have sufficient training in this very rapid development phase of AI to in a sophisticated and very critical way, integrate AI. And this connects with the first question, of course, about one step is faculty seeking training in order to then pass off that knowledge to students. And I just want to add as well, to tack on to this question, that I think it is dangerous to overly prioritize AI literacy in our responsibilities as educators in higher ed. I think more than ever, we need both more AI literacy training and more institutional and educational commitment to skill development in other areas, like basic knowledge acquisition and networking and teamwork and development of original, argumentative, authorial voice. We do need to think about whether we're preparing students for AI, but a host of other issues that feed into how they will use AI and what they should and can expect of AI. So yes and no to answer the question. Thank
Fair
you.
enough. Anoff, would you like to?
Yeah, so to echo something that Stephanie said, I certainly think that higher education is presenting some skills that students need to have AI literacy, particularly critical thinking. And I would say when higher education is at its best, it's also fostering curiosity, which I think is key to understanding when AI tools are useful or not. What I might add as something that I think universities could do more of is actually present students with opportunities just to practice using AI tools. I think that this is key to doing some of this thinking work about when these tools are actually useful, when they're actually a hindrance. So to give a concrete example, shortly after ChatGPT became widely available, I spent a lot of time testing its capability to summarize articles, because that's a large part of the work that I need to do when I am working with various instructors. It's very helpful for me to be able to say, here is an article that seems to relate to your situation, and here's a brief summary of it so that they can get a sense of whether it would actually help their teaching. And so I spent a lot of time testing ChatGPT in particular on how accurate are its summaries, and when it's summarizing something, is it using language that I think is appropriate? Because when I taught first-year writing courses for undergraduates, I spent a lot of time with them thinking about like how summary is a series of writing choices. It's not just about like, is the content accurate? It's what are you choosing to highlight? What tone are you setting? Do you seem critical? Are you trying to be objective? And what I learned from that process is that I do find the use of ChatGPT useful for mini summaries, but I also learned that I feel very strongly about a summary having my own writing voice. And so if I use an AI tool to summarize something, I'm almost certainly going to have to go back and rewrite it or double check. It takes a significant amount of time. And I only know that because I was in a position where I had the time to play around with these tools, to experiment, to really practice and do so in a situation where it wasn't like something was really on the line. I could spend some time just making some bad summaries, and I was still being paid for it because part of my work was to better understand these tools. Now, that's something that I had the freedom to do. It's something that on some campuses, some students and some instructors have the freedom to do, but I think not enough. I think that universities can be doing more just to provide the tools that students and instructors might want to play around with, and to provide support for people to practice with those tools. I think that higher education is valuable in part because it's a place where people can practice without the stakes being too high, where you can try something out, and if it turns out that it is a failure, then it's okay. You did it in a relatively safe place, and you learned, okay, I actually should not use this tool for this goal, or I shouldn't actually approach this in this way, but maybe next time I can tweak something, use a slightly different prompt, use a slightly different tool. And so I think that that is what I would point to as something more that we can do. We can just provide more opportunities to practice for students and, as I said, for instructors, because Stephanie, I think you're right that instructors aren't given enough support for some types of professional development. It is opt-in, and maybe if we were more explicit about valuing instructors just taking an hour or two out of their schedule to test their assignments and really try and create a good AI-generated version of their assignment to better understand what these tools can do or not do, maybe instructors would feel more confident about their understanding of these tools as well.
Excellent. And I really like the way that we frame that in terms of it's also about making time to fail again in academia as a space of highlighting again what learning is and how this development comes out of it, as opposed to this need for a hyper-polished product, and that's what the education's supposed to develop. And it seems like, in a lot of conversations with other faculty, that learning should take place through multiple stages of failure. And that is an important element of growth. But highlighting that, and not only from the level of instructors, but from the level of administration to support it, is something that's sometimes missing. So the last question we'll probably have time to get to is, we've covered the general costs, but I also know that there are specific costs associated with integrating AI into education that each of you is specifically passionate about. So I was wondering if we could start with that. Stephanie, what is the cost of AI that you find most pressing?
I apologize. I will absolutely sound like a humanities scholar with this response. I worry about the belief in techno-optimism, or the belief that technology makes the world a better place. And I am oversimplifying this perspective. And as expected, I have not heard this belief have a strong presence in the panels so far in this symposium. This perspective, however, I think minimizes the role humans play in their capacity for failure and bias and creativity as well in the processes of both creating and using AI. So building off of this powerful, and I still think too pervasive, belief in wider society overall, I think that overdependence on generative AI will lead to a loss of higher order thinking skills, which is nothing revolutionary to say, but I do think that cost is not one that we can afford to pay in the landscape of higher ed. We should ask ourselves constantly, especially with the speed of AI development, what critical thinking skills we are willing and want to offload on AI, right? We hear this term cognitive offloading. I think it's crucial that, especially in academia right now, we take a pause, take a beat, and consider what skills we want to see to AI and what skills we want to promote and protect for human behavior, to tie in with the theme of this conference or symposium, staying human in the age of AI. So what are those higher order thinking skills? And for example, take the ability to analyze, synthesize, and evaluate information. These can be aided by AI and honestly done quite well at this stage. But those are foundational skills that lead to other higher order skills that AI, even in this sophisticated stage, is not as adept at performing. Problem solving, decision making, reflective thinking, questioning of assumptions, reframing of problems. And then those are skills that lead humans to be able to go through even higher level motions, which we need to bring to solve society's problems. Examining, to be able to change, create, justify, and empathize. And that last one in particular, I think, is something that is a decidedly human behavior. So I, again, as a humanist, as a history professor, I'm quite protective of nurturing these higher order skills that I want the students who are in physics and computer science and nursing and accounting that I do teach in many of my classes to apply to their own disciplines that I think are integrating AI in very sophisticated and necessary ways. So I think I'm privileged as a humanities scholar to take a stance that is a bit more perhaps pessimistic at times of AI, but I'm trying to be mindful of the whole student that I'm hopefully helping to nurture in my classroom. Thank you.
Thank you. Anoff?
So I think a cost that I am particularly concerned with, probably because of my background, is linguistic flattening. As I mentioned, I taught writing courses for many years when I was a graduate student. And one of the joys of that process for me was watching students develop a unique writing voice, watching students discover how their cultural background and the writers that they wanted to emulate and the feedback from their peers could help them develop a unique voice with which to articulate their ideas. And I don't think that's actually unique to writing courses. I think that that is often a goal of higher education more broadly. We want physics majors to be able to articulate what they're learning in their own voice. We want history majors to be able to talk about history in their own voice. And linguistic justice scholars have done a lot of work to make the university a place where there's even more diversity in the kinds of voices that we consider valuable. But I am worried about the integration of AI tools flattening that diversity. We do know, it was mentioned briefly in the previous panel, that the training data for many of these models is biased. It's not representative of the diversity that students might be bringing into the classroom. And so if students are using these tools unthinkingly, there is going to be a kind of flattening of that diversity, and you're going to see more writing that sounds similar. You're going to hear students perhaps presenting ideas that are more and more alike. Now, that said, I do also think that AI tools can be useful for developing a unique voice. I think that one of the major obstacles for some students, for example, to developing a unique voice is just fear of the blank page. And I think that having AI tools as a way to get students started on their process of articulating an idea can be valuable. I also think that AI tools can help to improve the confidence of students who might be writing in an additional language that they're less familiar with. Having access to those tools can provide them with a sense of safety and can help them to feel more confident, as I said, in getting started with that writing process. And then, so sometimes I think that that can be a helpful first step. And I also do think, and maybe this is just me being overly optimistic, but I truly believe that in a world where our internet becomes full of AI attempts to emulate human writing, that truly unique human voices are going to be valued even more. I think that that becomes a way for us to then articulate some of the a key value of higher education. We can point to higher education and say, this is a place where you can learn to speak your own ideas authentically, and that won't just be helpful for you, it's also going to be something that's going to be valued by others.
Great, thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, and thank you both, because I agree with everything that was said. I just had an AI case in my classroom where the student said he thought that I wanted to see writing that looked like that, and so that's why he was using AI, and it's like, oh no, I wanted to hear you. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, Anoff. Gonna finish us off on a really exciting, happy note. One of the biggest concerns I have related to generative AI use is the environmental impact, and I think we'd be remiss to not mention it. You know, there's a lot of articles out there you can read, a lot of mixed reviews on the environmental impact of using generative AI tools. There's some studies that claim that a single input into an AI tool is the equivalent of a bottle of water in order to cool the data centers. So every time you do an input, that's one bottle of water. There's other articles that suggest that, well, when you use generative AI, you tend to do a single query versus when you do a Google search, you do the Google search and then you open a link and then you go back and do another link and then you change your Google search and go to another link. And so is it really worse? I would argue now that, well, if you do a Google search, you also get AI summaries, so I guess it doesn't really make a difference one way or the other. The environmental impact is really concerning, and I think the most concerning thing about it is the lack of transparency that we're seeing about what that environmental impact actually is. And it seems nearly impossible to get a consensus on just how enormous the environmental impact is and how it's going to continue to develop. We're seeing instances of nuclear plants being reopened in order to increase our energy output, and we're also seeing as I mentioned, data centers being put up in a lot of places. A local example of this, for those of you who might not be familiar, there's a racetrack about an hour from here called Pittsburgh International Raceway, commonly known as Pit Race, and it was just announced 2 months ago that they're going to be closing Pit Race and putting in a data center. And so this is one of those things that it's heartbreaking for the people who use that racetrack. I go there regularly. So it's heartbreaking for that component of it, but it's also heartbreaking for the local communities where they had absolutely no say in what was happening. They will continue to have no say in this. It is going to eliminate a lot of jobs. Data centers do not create jobs because you only need a couple people to run a data center, and they usually bring in their own experts to run those. So it does not create jobs. Data centers put a ton of additional stress on our energy grids. They also require clean drinking water. Because why not? Of course we have to use the clean drinking water. And so it puts additional stress on the communities by using up a lot of their access to clean resources. And there's also a lot of information out there about the noise that data centers create because they have fans constantly rotating fans to help cool the data centers, and so they have a constant drumming sound that occurs. And so thinking about, this like pretty enormous environmental impact that we're not going to be able to undo if we decide that AI was a mistake going forward. We've been really all in the last couple years on AI and thinking about a lot of the irreversible impact that that's going to have, and most often disproportionately affecting communities that already have access to limited resources. So that's definitely something I have as a concern, and it's something I really struggle with because part of my job is to understand how AI tools work so that I can help support others, and I feel like I have to compartmentalize, try not to feel bad when I use AI for something as we go forward. So it's something I would love to see more information about.
Great, thank you. And now I'd like to turn it over to Audrey Waters for a response, and then hopefully at the end we'll have some time for some questions.
Gosh, thank you all. I have so many thoughts, so you'll have to excuse me if they're all sort of scattered. I think I want to start with a couple of quotes from Antonio Gramsci. Right, he said that the old world is dying, the new world struggles to be born, now is the time of monsters. And I think we are living in very, very monstrous times. And AI is a symptom of that, I think. But Gramsci also said something that I always hold very close to my heart. He said, I am a pessimist because of intellect, but an optimist because of will. And I am an optimist, right? I do not think that the future is written already. I do not think that AI is inevitable. When I hear people say it's here, You just have to deal with it. I say that's not true. We don't know. We don't know what the future will bring. These companies are incredibly overextended in terms of the amount of money that they've raised, the amount of money that it takes in order to create these models. And I'm not sure it's clear that there's enough money on the planet to satisfy the needs that their investors have to make this profitable. So I don't think that the future is necessarily AI. I think that we have the ability to shape our future in a different direction. So about 13 years ago, 2012, the New York Times declared it the year of the MOOCs. Who remembers MOOCs, right? The year of the MOOCs. And there were several different MOOC companies, massive open online courses, and this was supposed to be the future of higher education, right? Many of these actually came from the AI department at Stanford University. One of the companies called Udacity was founded by Sebastian Thrun, who I think people would prefer to be remembered now as one of the early engineers of the self-driving car. But he ran a MOOC company called Udacity, and he told Wired magazine that in 30 years' time there would only be 10 universities left in the world, and Udacity would be one of them. Udacity's gone, right? Udacity didn't even make it a decade. I think it's an interesting thought experiment to think, what would the 10 universities be left in the world? Harvard has a very large endowment. Some universities have a very big football team. There are reasons as though that would be, 10, is that enough to even have a conference for March Madness? I think 10's a little bit of a small number. That being said, I think we are in a moment where higher education is in a lot of trouble in this country. Public higher education in particular is in a lot of trouble. We're seeing massive amounts of disinvestment. We're seeing the public become increasingly skeptical with whether or not schools, the K through 12 and higher education, are worth funding. Now is a time of monsters. And I think artificial intelligence is part of an industry that has spent the last few decades being very interested in being there as an alternative for public investment, or from public education. We've been told since at least the Clinton era that we needn't fund schools, we needn't fund libraries, because what we have instead is the internet. And I think that what we've found is we have transferred a lot of power in giant companies that are monopolizing knowledge, and that's a dangerous place to be. I think that what we have in education as well is now over a century, but certainly decades worth of education technologies already in place that have shaped what teaching and learning look like. The ubiquitous learning management system, for example, that has sort of defined a lot of the activities in the classroom, that has actually come to sort of define oftentimes what pedagogy looks like. I think that these tools have actually diminished our ability as both instructors and as students to have autonomy and agency, because these tools have already sort of circumscribed what teaching looks like. They've circumscribed what the interactions look like. They've circumscribed what a discussion looks like. They've circumscribed what assessment looks like. And now, of course, all of these tools offer the little shiny generative AI button in the corner so that you can sort of auto-do things with this tool. And so I think we should probably question not simply artificial intelligence, but really question the ways in which many of our practices, many of our pedagogical practices have already been shaped by technologies that might not have our best interests, the best interests of students, the best interests of knowledge, the best interests of humanity at heart. Their interests at the end of the day are profit, right? Their interests are profit. And I think that artificial intelligence is, at its core, really about automation. It is about labor. And I think that what it's been doing, and I think what many of these education technologies have done, is sort of reduced things into little components that can be they promise can be automated, can be datafied, can be made into something that we could sort of do more efficiently. But I think that what that does is it circumscribes how we think about these tasks. And I think that when you offload things to AI, it isn't just a matter of a cognitive offloading, but these tasks are kind of constitutive. If you have AI design your lesson, how you design a lesson is actually a core part of teaching. It isn't simply a task that is meaningless. It can be a task that's annoying, certainly. Writing the syllabi, doing some of this bureaucratic work can be annoying, but it's actually constitutive of who you are and how you teach, how you embody that role in the classroom and the space that you make, the space you make for students. And I think that, I guess in closing, I'd say, we want that space to have an open-ended possibility. We want that space to be a place of becoming, a place of possibility for students. And I think that one of the things that should be is a place that is safe. We heard a lot about safe spaces, but also a place to say no, a place to refuse, a safe space to become something that isn't sort of circumscribed by a program that someone else has designed.